All right, so have you ever like stopped and wondered if all this social media stuff, is it actually good for us? Like deep down,
Right.
is this really, beneficial? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into this analysis by Paul Joseph Watson, and he has some pretty strong opinions about it.
Yeah, yes.
And he basically makes the case that social media could be harming us. So we're going to unpack all that today.
Yeah, what's really interesting is Watson starts off by comparing social media to other things that we consider to be addictive,
Like,
smoking or gambling.
whoa, okay. So right off the bat, that's kind of like, huh.
Makes you think.
Yeah, it makes you think. Like, how many times have you just been mindlessly scrolling through your feed? And, and so is it possible that our brains are kind of being hijacked by these platforms?
Well, Watson argues that they are.
Yeah.
And he points to the way that these platforms are designed to trigger the release of dopamine, which is a chemical in our brain that makes us feel good.
Oh.
And every time we get a like, every comment, every share, we get a little hit of that dopamine.
Oh.
And that keeps us coming back for more.
So it's almost like we're chasing that dopamine high without even realizing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the platforms are designed to make that chase as addictive as possible.
Okay, so like, what are some examples?
Well, think about like the pull to refresh feature.
Oh, yeah.
You pull down and refresh.
Yeah.
It's basically like pulling a lever on a slot machine.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to get. But there's always the chance of a reward.
Oh, interesting.
So you keep pulling.
Right. And what about those little red notification icons?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like those are always designed to make us feel like, oh my God, I got to check it right now.
Absolutely. Those notifications tap into our fear of missing out. They create anxiety and make it really hard to resist checking our phones, even when we know we probably should be focusing on something else.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like these platforms are kind of taking advantage of our natural instincts, like our need for connection and validation, and almost like using it against us.
That's one of Watson's main points. He argues that social media is particularly harmful to millennials,
Okay.
who he says have been raised with this constant need for approval, and social media becomes this echo chamber where that need for validation can just spiral out of control.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So instead of developing like, a healthy sense of self-worth from within.
Right.
They're constantly seeking it from external sources like likes and shares and comments and all that.
Precisely, and that can lead to a cycle of dependence and insecurity.
Oh, wow.
Watson even compares millennials to babies with pacifiers, constantly needing that digital soother to feel okay.
It's kind of a harsh analogy.
It is, yeah.
But I kind of see where he's going with it. It's
Yeah.
like, if we're always looking for that validation from others, are we really ever learning to validate ourselves?
That is a great question, and it's one that Watson really encourages us to consider.
Yeah.
He argues that social media can actually stunt our emotional and psychological development by preventing us from forming a healthy sense of self.
That's deep. And this is all happening at a time when, our brains are still developing, right?
Right.
Like he talks about how social media affects our attention spans
Yes.
and our memory.
Yes.
Is there a connection there?
He argues that there is, and he brings in this concept of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to our experiences.
Okay.
So if we're constantly bombarded with these information snippets and notifications and rapid fire content,
Yeah.
our brains actually start to rewire themselves to adapt to that fragmented way of processing information.
So we're literally training our brains to be distracted.
In a way, yes.
Wow.
And that can have real consequences for our ability to focus and concentrate and think deeply about things. Watson cites a study showing that our attention spans have significantly decreased in recent years, and he believes that social media plays a major role in that trend.
That's pretty scary to think about. Like, what about the impact on memory? Does he address that?
He does. He argues that the constant stream of information on social media makes it harder for us to encode information into our long-term memory. We're so busy skimming and scrolling that we're not really taking the time to process and retain information.
I know. I've definitely experienced that. Sometimes I'll read an article online and then 5 minutes later I'm like, wait, what was that even about?
That's a very common experience in the age of social media.
Yeah.
And it's something we need to be aware of, because if we can't remember what we read, we're not really learning or growing. We're just consuming information without actually absorbing it.
It makes you wonder, like, what is all this screen time doing to our brains in the long run?
Right.
And it's not just about memory and attention span. He also talks about how social media can impact our ability to empathize with others.
That's right. He suggests that the curated nature of social media, where we mostly see carefully constructed versions of people's lives, can make it harder to understand and relate to the struggles of others.
It's like we're constantly comparing ourselves to these, like, idealized versions of people, which can make us feel inadequate and disconnected.
Exactly. And that can make it harder to develop genuine empathy and compassion for others, which are essential for building meaningful relationships and creating a more humane society.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So it's like it's affecting us on all these different levels.
It is, yeah.
It's not just like, oh, I'm spending too much time. It's like, what is it doing to me as a person?
Exactly. And into our relationships with others.
Wow. Okay. So that's just like the tip of the iceberg of
Yeah.
what Watson is talking about.
Right. He goes into a lot more detail about the societal impacts of social media.
Oh, okay. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But first, we got to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And it's not just like our own personal well-being.
Right.
Watson argues that social media is having this negative impact on society as a whole.
Oh, okay. So like, what do you mean by that?
Well, he believes that social media is fueling this whole identity politics thing and outrage culture.
Oh, interesting.
He says it's creating these online echo chambers where people are constantly like bombarded with information that just confirms their existing biases.
Yeah.
Which makes it so much harder to have like a civil conversation or find common ground.
So instead of like coming together to address these important issues,
Right.
we're just like shouting at each other from our own little corners of the internet.
That's essentially what he's arguing. And it's creating this climate of division and hostility that's making it increasingly difficult to like actually solve problems.
Yeah, it's like everyone's on edge just waiting for the next thing to be outraged about.
Exactly. And this constant state of outrage can be so draining, both individually and collectively.
Yeah, for sure.
It takes a toll on our mental health and our relationships and just our ability to function as a society.
It's interesting because like on the one hand, social media gives us this platform to connect with people from all over the world. But on the other hand, it seems like it's also driving us further apart.
That's the paradox of social media.
Yeah.
It has the potential to connect us.
Right.
But it also has this potential to divide us.
Right.
And unfortunately, it seems like the divisive aspects are kind of winning right now.
It's kind of ironic, don't you think? Like the very people who created these platforms, the tech elites, they seem to be aware of the potential dangers. Like Watson mentions how people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they were very strict about limiting their own children's screen time.
Yeah, that's something that Watson finds really hypocritical.
Yeah.
Like these leaders are promoting these technologies to everyone else, but then they're shielding their own kids from them.
It makes you wonder if they know something we don't.
It definitely raises some questions.
Yeah.
If the people who design these platforms are concerned about their impact on young minds, shouldn't that give us all pause?
I think so. I think so for sure. But how do we break free from this cycle? It feels like we're all so hooked.
Watson does offer some practical advice for like reclaiming control over our time and our attention.
Okay.
He suggests limiting notifications,
Okay.
checking messages less often, and even creating tech-free zones in our homes.
So it's about like setting boundaries and being more intentional about how we use these technologies.
Exactly. It's about remembering that we actually have a choice.
Yeah.
We don't have to be slaves to our devices.
Right.
We can choose to use them in a way that serves us rather than letting them control us.
It's like we need to remember that real life is happening outside of our screens.
Precisely. And those real-life connections and experiences and interactions, that's ultimately what brings true happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Social media can be a tool for connection, but it should never replace those essential elements of a meaningful life.
I think that's a really important point. We need to be mindful of how much time and energy we're devoting to these platforms and make sure we're not neglecting the things that really matter.
Absolutely. And it's not even just about the time we spend online.
Right.
It's about the mental and emotional energy that we're devoting to social media.
Yeah.
Are we constantly comparing ourselves to others? Are we feeling anxious or inadequate because of what we're seeing online?
Yeah.
If so, it might be time to reevaluate our relationship with these platforms.
So, like, what's the takeaway here? Is social media inherently bad?
I don't think it's necessarily about good or bad.
Oh.
It's about awareness and being intentional.
Okay.
Social media can be a really powerful tool for communication, for connection, for sharing information.
Right.
But it can also be the source of distraction, comparison, and anxiety.
So it's up to us to decide how we use it.
Exactly. We have the power to choose how we engage with these technologies.
Yeah.
We can choose to use them in a way that enhances our lives.
Yeah.
Or we can let them control us and diminish our well-being. The choice is ours.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
It's really making me think.
Yeah, and Watson goes on to talk about some pretty alarming statistics about the effects of social media.
Okay, we'll get into that after a quick break. Yeah, it really sounds like we need to be honest with ourselves about how social media is affecting us
Absolutely.
both individually, but then also like as a society.
Yeah, I think that's really the first step. Just awareness is key. We need to be paying attention to how these platforms are making us feel, how they're impacting our behavior, and whether they're really like adding value to our lives.
Yeah, Watson uses some like pretty strong language when he's describing the problem.
Like that.
He says, social media has created this psychologically manipulative dystopia,
Wow.
and even compares it to the tobacco industry. Do you think that's an accurate comparison?
I think there are definitely some parallels there.
Okay.
You know, both industries have been accused of using manipulative tactics to hook consumers and downplaying the potential harms of their products.
Right.
And in both cases, I think there's a growing awareness of need for regulation and greater transparency.
Yeah, for sure. He also brings up some like really alarming statistics about the negative effects of social media, like the increase in hospital admissions for suicidal teenagers and the rising rates of depression among young people.
Those statistics are definitely concerning.
Yeah.
You know, correlation doesn't equal causation, but there is a growing body of research that suggests a link between excessive social media use and mental health issues.
Right.
Particularly among young people.
It's scary to think that something that's, supposed to connect us could actually be contributing to these problems.
It really highlights the importance of balance and moderation.
Yeah.
You know, like anything else, social media can be enjoyed in a healthy way.
Right.
But it's so crucial to be aware of those potential risks and to set boundaries to protect our well-being.
So what can we do? Like, aside from limiting our screen time, setting those boundaries, are there any other, like, practical steps we can take to kind of mitigate these negative effects?
One thing that Watson suggests is being more mindful of the content that we're consuming. He encourages us to curate our feeds, unfollow accounts that make us feel bad, and seek out content that's uplifting or inspiring or educational.
So it's not just about like reducing the quantity of time we spend online,
Right.
but it's also about improving the quality of our online experience.
Exactly. We have a choice in what we expose ourselves to. We can choose to fill our feeds with negativity and drama,
Right.
or we can choose to focus on things that bring us joy, knowledge, and connection.
It's like anything else in life, right?
Exactly.
We get to choose what we focus on.
Exactly. And remember, social media is just a tool.
Yeah.
It's up to us to decide how we use it
Right.
and to make sure it's serving our best interests.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
So for all you deep divers out there, I think the main takeaway here is to be aware of the potential impact of social media, the good and the bad. Set those boundaries, curate your feeds, and most importantly, make sure it's enhancing your life, not detracting from it.
Well said. And, it's interesting to think if the creators of these platforms are wary of their own children using them.
Right.
Maybe we should all take a moment to really reflect on our own relationship with social media and make sure it's a healthy one.
That's a great point.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.